Hi, I'm Anitra. My sister told her in-laws I was unemployed. She erased my title, my work, my name, because my truth didn't fit her story. At her engagement party, I was seated by the restroom, left off the family slideshow, mistaken for waitstaff. Again. Then her future father-in-law asked me, "So, what do you do?" I smiled. 2 words later, she dropped her glass. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased in your own bloodline, and then rewrite the ending yourself? I arrived alone. I always did. The valet took my keys with a rehearsed smile, not asking for my name, just handed me a ticket like I was any other hotel guest drifting into another over-decorated Houston ballroom. I clutched my invitation, not because I needed it to get in, but because I wanted to remind myself this time I had, in fact, been invited. Technically, inside, the lobby smelled like roses and money, the kind of arrangement that screamed custom order from a boutique florist in River Oaks. Bryn never did anything modestly. As I made my way to the check-in desk, the coordinator looked up with a tight-lipped smile. She scrolled through her iPad, her brows pinching slightly. "Name again?" she asked. "Anitra Gaines." More scrolling. Tap. Scroll again. Strange. Not showing up in the primary list. Maybe a +1? I didn't flinch. I'd been maybe in this family for a long time. "No, I'm the bride's sister." Her smile faltered. "Oh, right. Must have been a mix-up. Happens all the time." No, it didn't, but I didn't argue. She scribbled a badge. Anita G. Guest. Unverified. Handed it over like she was giving me a napkin. A cousin I barely recognized gave me a once-over. She leaned in, feigned surprise. "You came! Bryn said you were between things right now?" She said it like a question, but her smirk wasn't curious. It was condescending. I just nodded, smiled the way you do when someone tells you your house is on fire and offers you a plastic cup of water. I'd been between things ever since Bryn decided my quiet life didn't fit her narrative. Thanksgiving last year came to mind. Bryn had casually told a table of strangers I was exploring freelancing while I sat there with a federal judge's appointment letter in my purse. That dinner, I stayed silent. Tonight, I wasn't sure I would. I stepped into the ballroom. Lights everywhere. A string quartet nestled in the corner, playing something soft and forgettable. Tables sparkled. My place card was shoved at the far end of the room, near the kitchen doors. Anita Gaines, guest, unverified. Again, they didn't just forget me, they reclassified me. A young usher mumbled, "Sorry, they changed the seating chart last minute. I can talk to someone." "No need." I cut him off. "I won't be here long." No one came to greet me. I sat quietly, watching the room come alive. Bryn floated in moments later, drenched in designer fabric and camera flashes. She hugged everyone like royalty, posed next to the floral arch with Marcus, beaming. My mother looked at her like she hung the moon. My father stood nearby, giving the thumbs up to a man I assumed was someone important. Not one of them looked toward me. They never noticed when I wasn't around. They preferred it that way. I watched as the guests toasted promotions, engagements, Caribbean vacations. Nobody asked me what I did. No one even asked how I was. I sipped sparkling water, listened politely, nodded when needed. At one point, an aunt tried to mention my name. "And Anitra, she's..." Bryn waved her hand. "She's figuring things out." Then laughter, from everyone. I stared at my glass. "I've sentenced men to life in prison with more courtesy than I'm shown at this table," I muttered under my breath. As I pushed my chair back to leave, because truly, how much more was I expected to tolerate, I heard someone near the main dais say my name. "Is that the sister Bryn said was between jobs?" I turned. A tall man in his 60s, sharply dressed, holding a bourbon in one hand, was watching me with interest. Bryn's soon-to-be father-in-law. He smiled faintly. And then, he began to approach. He didn't blink. Not when I turned to meet his gaze. Not when I straightened my posture like I'd done 100 times stepping into a courtroom. Bryn's future father-in-law looked at me the way someone does when they're assembling a puzzle and just realized a piece had been missing all along. "Miss Gaines, isn't it?" he asked, offering a hand with just enough firmness to feel like a test. "I hear you're in transition?" There it was. I knew the phrasing wasn't his. It had Bryn's fingerprints all over it, crafted just vague enough to imply disappointment without sounding impolite. "I've worn a few different hats," I said, keeping my tone even. "Life has a way of reshaping roles, doesn't it?" He smiled politely, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "What line of work are you in currently?" Before I could answer, the air shifted. Perfume, floral, over-applied, arrived before the woman herself. "Bryn." "Oh, you found her," she said brightly, too brightly. She placed a hand on his arm, like she was rescuing him. Daddy always gets lost in conversation. I glanced at her hand. Polished nails, ring glittering, control tightening. He turned toward her, not fully convinced. "We were just talking about Anitra's background." She let out a laugh, light but tinged with tension. "Oh, she's exploring a few new directions right now, just taking some time to realign, isn't that right?" I let silence speak for me. A man standing nearby, holding a bourbon and clearly eavesdropping, chuckled. "Didn't you say she was unemployed?" Bryn's laugh this time was quicker, more nervous. "She's between opportunities. You know how it is when you're figuring out your next big thing." I said nothing. I'd fought too hard to let someone else narrate my story, especially not here, not like this. But I also knew that sometimes silence is louder than a correction. Silence, when held with confidence, makes people lean in. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a younger bridesmaid watching me, maybe 16. She looked curious, not dismissive, not amused, just quietly observing, like she was cataloging how a woman handles being diminished in public and still holds her ground. I didn't smile, I didn't frown either. Bryn's father-in-law tilted his head. "You're remarkably composed." "It's a habit," I replied softly. "One develops it when raised in a room full of storytellers." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Not quite, not. Bryn pulled him toward another group. "Let's go find Marcus. He wanted to show you the centerpieces." Her voice was too high again. He allowed himself to be guided, but just before he stepped fully away, he looked over his shoulder at me. "Something tells me we'll be talking again soon," he said. I offered him the faintest smile, one that said, "You have no idea." As they drifted off into a sea of sequins and practiced laughs, I made my way back to my table, now more aware of the eyes that followed me. The dessert table was across the room, a long stretch of glass platters and gold-tinted signage. I wasn't particularly hungry, but I wanted to move. I needed to reset the tension in my shoulders, the weight in my chest. Walking helped. When I arrived, I reached for a plate, paused, and then noticed my name tag had been moved, slightly smudged, edges curled, stained with what looked like buttercream or coffee. Anita Gaines, guest, unverified. Still wrong. Still secondary. I picked it up, stared at it for a beat longer than I meant to. That tag wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I stared at the name tag in my hand. Annette G. Misspelled, smudged, half of it unreadable beneath a streak of frosting or maybe someone's spilled drink. The corners curled, damp from condensation. I turned it over slowly, rubbing my thumb across the ruined surface. That tiny piece of cardstock didn't just bear a mistake, it held a message. It took me back. Not to anything dramatic or loud, just paper, cardstock actually. The kind I spent too much money on when I mailed out my law school graduation announcements. Cream-colored engraved edges. My name in full, with the initials J.D., stamped in small raised letters beneath it. I included a photocopy of my bar results. Not because I needed validation, but because I was proud. I had built that moment. I sent them out with care. One to my mother, one to my father, and one to Bryn. Hers tucked inside a matching envelope with a handwritten note. "Thought you'd want to know first." None of them replied. A few weeks later, one envelope came back, unopened. The seal still intact, my handwriting sharp across the front, returned to sender because, according to the post office, recipient moved. Except Bryn hadn't moved. She just didn't want what I had to share. That moment wasn't just silence. It was erasure. When people ignore a milestone, they're not just absent. They're saying, "Your success isn't our narrative." I placed the soiled name tag back on the edge of the dessert table, letting it dangle awkwardly among untouched napkins. Across the room, laughter rang out like wind chimes in a storm. Bryn stood with a circle of guests near the champagne tower, gesturing wide, radiant in a white cocktail dress. My mother clung to her arm like an ornament, nodding along as if every word Bryn uttered was gospel. I watched them clinically. Not bitter, just detached, like I was reviewing evidence at a trial. This wasn't rage, it was recognition. Nearby, two older women chatted while eyeing me from across their glasses of rosé. One of them tilted her head toward me and whispered, just loud enough to catch, "She doesn't look like she belongs in this family." I didn't flinch. I didn't move. But inside, something exhaled. Maybe they're right, I thought. Maybe I was never supposed to. The last time I tried to belong, it was over a phone call. It had been a year ago. I'd just received confirmation of my appointment to the federal bench. I called my mother, still thinking, after everything, that she'd want to hear it from me. She answered, distracted, her voice hurried. "Hi, Mom, something happened," I said. "Oh, sweetheart," she interrupted. "Bryn just got engaged last night. We've got so much planning to do." I let the pause speak for itself. She didn't notice. "Call me next week, okay? Don't drag work into the family right now." I never finished the sentence. But I remember what I wanted to say. I just became one of the youngest women to be appointed in this circuit. That memory resurfaced like a bruise touched too hard. Back in the present, the music shifted. A waiter passed with a tray of filled glasses. I declined. Too many bubbles, not enough substance. As I turned, I nearly collided with my mother. She appeared out of nowhere, eyes pinched with fake warmth, like someone doing penance on a Sunday morning. "If you're thinking of saying something," she said, leaning in close, "just let her have today." My smile was faint but surgical. I let her have years. Her eyes twitched. She stepped back. Didn't respond. Just adjusted her shawl and walked away. A moment later, Bryn swept past me. Her hand grazed my shoulder in passing, a gesture so casual it would seem affectionate to anyone watching. But to me, it felt calculated, a mark of territory, dominance disguised as kindness. I shifted my stance. Nearby, a child ran full speed into the cake table. Plates clattered. A napkin tower toppled. A gasp rippled through the room, then laughter. No one scolded her. No one said, "Don't ruin this." They assumed she didn't matter enough to ruin anything yet. I swallowed down the thought and walked to the edge of the room, letting the chaos resume behind me. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A soft voice came through, uncertain but sincere. "Judge Gaines, I just wanted to thank you again. You saved our family." I froze. Not from discomfort, from recognition. A case from earlier this year. A woman whose landlord had stolen her retirement fund, Anitra versus Halstead Corp. I hadn't thought about it in months. "I think I needed to hear that more than you know," I said. And I meant it. I slipped my phone back into my clutch just as the lights dimmed and the DJ's voice floated across the ballroom. "Let's give a warm welcome to the bride-to-be, Bryn Gaines." Applause erupted on cue, polished, enthusiastic, the kind of cheer that fills a room whether it's earned or not. The spotlight followed her to the center of the floor, where she stood poised and ready, like she'd been rehearsing her whole life for this exact applause. She took the mic with practiced grace, flashing her best pageant smile. Thank you," she began. "It means the world to Marcus and me to have all of you here tonight." I listened, unmoving, as she rolled out her gratitude like a well-designed press release. She thanked our parents first, Dad for his guidance, Mom for her support. She then named off old teachers, work mentors, Marcus's family, their dog groomer. She even gave a nod to her tribe of women who held her up, but never once did my name leave her mouth. When she glanced toward me, calculated, not accidental, she added with a laugh, "And of course my sister's here tonight. She's figuring things out and we're so proud she could join us." The audience clapped, the kind of applause that didn't come from knowing, but from being told what to believe. I clapped too, slowly, one hand against the other, my gaze steady. That's how they delete you, I thought, with charm and champagne. The moment passed. She transitioned into a toast, raised her glass, and sealed her image once more as the picture-perfect bride. People swallowed the illusion like free wine. I left the edge of the ballroom quietly, skirting around a group of photographers snapping candids near the cake. I tried to head toward the dessert table, but a man in a tux stopped me. "Sorry, could you help find the cake knife?" the caterer asked. I blinked. "I'm not staff." "Oh, sorry, you just looked—" I didn't finish his sentence for him. 2 steps later, a photographer waved me aside. "Family only, just this frame." I stepped back, watched as my parents gathered around Bryn for another round of pictures. Even Marcus's nephews were wrangled in. No one looked for me, no one noticed I wasn't there. A young woman handed me a small binder, glossy with gold print. The Gaines Sterling story. Inside were family profiles for the wedding guests, pictures, bios, anecdotes. Bryn had a 3-page spread complete with glam shots and inspirational quotes. My page was on the back. A headshot from 10 years ago, slightly pixelated. The caption read, "Anitra Gaines, currently exploring new paths in life." I flipped the page twice, then shut it. A couple next to me murmured, "Bryn said her sister left corporate life to chase passion. So brave." I looked at them briefly and murmured, "That's not untrue, just not complete." But what I didn't say, what echoed in my head like a verdict was, they rewrote me into an accessory. And that kind of reframing wasn't clumsy, it was precise and intentional. I found a quiet corner near the back patio where one of my father's old colleagues, Uncle Warren, though he wasn't really my uncle, stood with a bourbon in hand. He tilted his glass toward me. "Still got that edge. I can see it." I raised an eyebrow. "Most people assume it's bitterness." "Nah," he replied. "Bitterness flickers. What you've got, that's steel." I smiled. "They think silence is agreement." He laughed softly. "It's not?" I looked him in the eye. Not even close. The night moved on. Bryn floated from one circle to the next, always centered. She finally approached, champagne in hand, smile curated to perfection. I braced myself for the inevitable. She leaned in, soft and saccharine. "I hope you're enjoying yourself. Don't overthink any of it. This is just a celebration." I didn't match her smile. I didn't need to. "Celebrations end," I said evenly. "Then real things begin." Her expression didn't falter, but her eyes did, just a flicker, and that was enough. I stepped out into the cooler air just beyond the terrace doors, letting the artificial breeze from inside seal behind me like a courtroom door shutting. My heels clicked softly against the stone floor as I walked toward a quiet alcove. I needed space, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was calculating. There's a difference. The murmur of the crowd behind me blurred into static, a haze of clinking glasses and polite laughter. My lungs stretched for the first time all night. The stars above Houston were faint, barely visible, washed out by the glow of chandeliers and string lights. But even a dim light exists. "Judge Gaines!" The voice came from behind me, deep and measured. I turned to see him again, Bryn's future father-in-law, standing there like he'd been waiting for the right moment. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "You're not." He stepped closer, not crowding, but deliberate. "There's something about you that doesn't match the version I've been told." I raised an eyebrow. "People tend to edit their stories for comfort." He chuckled. "I was in law enforcement before business. I can smell omissions." He paused. "So, what do you really do?" I tilted my head slightly. "Let's just say I hold people accountable. Formally." His eyes lit, the hint of a smile creeping onto his face. "Judge?" I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. His silence wasn't awkward. It was appreciative, respectful. A few nearby guests turned toward us, curiosity drawn not by volume, but by energy. People always sense a shift, even when they can't name it. Before either of us could speak again, Bryn glided into the conversation like a breeze that didn't belong. "There you are!" Her voice shot up half a pitch too high. "We were just talking about hobbies, right?" I looked at her, directly, slowly. I didn't blink. Her father-in-law cleared his throat. "Actually, I was asking your sister about her professional background." Bryn's smile twitched. Oh, Anitra's very private. She doesn't like to talk about work at parties. I said nothing. He nodded, but the change in him was clear. Interest had taken root. He excused himself with an easy grace, but not before giving me a nod that said, "We'll talk again." As he disappeared into the crowd, Bryn turned back to me, the veneer slipping just enough to show the rust beneath the gold. "I'm managing so many little fires tonight," she said through her teeth. "Let's not add one." "I'm not the one holding the matches," I said calmly. She didn't respond. Later, the music paused. The lights softened. A staff member took the microphone to announce something about a special gesture from the family. The lights dimmed again as a tray was carried out, silver and velvet, holding custom bracelets for core family members. Bryn received hers first, of course. Delicate rose gold with her name engraved beside Marcus's initials, one for Dad, one for Mom. Then, nothing. Nothing for me. My mother leaned toward me, whispering, "We didn't think you'd be here." That sentence held so many other things it didn't say. "We didn't want you. We hoped you wouldn't come. You don't belong here." The silence afterward was sharper than a scream. A few guests exchanged looks. One of Bryn's friends whispered something. Even Marcus looked off. A young staffer approached with a generic gift bag, pre-packed for forgotten plus ones. I held up a hand. "Don't." He stopped mid-step, then turned away, looking almost relieved. I stood tall and turned to face Bryn, who watched from across the room, eyes unreadable now. The kind of unreadable that usually meant panic disguised as poise. "You've made it very clear who belongs in this family narrative," I said. My voice didn't carry far, but the people around us leaned in. Then I added, "Be sure you're equally clear when the narrative flips." No one laughed, no one clapped, but no one looked away either. I walked toward the lobby. No rush, letting the moment settle like dust on marble. Just as I reached the entryway, a waiter stepped in front of me. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're needed near the VIP suite." I paused. "The VIP suite?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They said it's urgent." Only the press and the planners were back there, and something in me knew. This wasn't an accident. The hallway outside the VIP suite was quieter than I expected. No buzz of chatter, no frantic whispering, just the low hum of air conditioning and the steady beat of my heels against marble. I half expected another setup, another subtle jab cloaked in champagne and pleasantries, but as I turned the corner, I was met by someone I hadn't seen in years. "Judge Gaines?" The voice was clipped, precise. I looked up to find a woman with a press badge and a sense of confidence that only came from newsroom scars. "Rebecca Trammell," she said, holding out her hand. "Tribune Legal Affairs. We spoke, briefly, after the Trask case." Of course. I remembered her now. Front row in the courtroom, always taking notes, never blinking. "I didn't expect to see you here," she added, smiling knowingly. "I could say the same," I replied, shaking her hand. "I was invited to cover the engagement for a lifestyle feature," she said. "But you just became the real headline." Before I could redirect the conversation, her voice rose, just enough. "Judge Gaines, tell me, how does it feel to go from sentencing billionaires to standing unnoticed in your own family's event?" Silence blanketed the room. Heads turned. Forks stopped midair. Across the ballroom, Bryn froze. Her hand clutched the stem of her flute a second too long. I watched the micro-expressions flicker across her face. Confusion, dread, calculation. A ripple of hush swept through the crowd. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Federal judge." 2 words, crisp, absolute. Gasps came from the back of the room. A murmur traveled like smoke across the tables. The father-in-law, standing near the band, took a slow sip of his drink, watching closely now. I turned to Rebecca. "This isn't a courthouse, Ms. Trammell." "But thank you for your interest," she smiled, stepping aside with the grace of someone who knew exactly what she'd just triggered. Bryn was already moving, storming across the room with a tight smile, her eyes glassy with disbelief. "You could have said something earlier," she hissed, voice just under her breath. I didn't flinch. "Why? You already wrote my role." The air around us thickened. I could feel the room watching now, not with curiosity, but with attention. "You know how this looks?" she asked. I held her gaze. "I know exactly how this looks, for once." A man near the dessert table, older, familiar. Harold Bingham, retired appellate judge, stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said. "Judge Gaines. Trask embezzlement case, wasn't it?" I nodded once. 15 years, he said to the crowd. "Protected thousands of retirement accounts. It was in every journal. Impressive work." Applause followed, not explosive, but clean, intentional. A few people stood. A few others stared at Bryn. Her carefully curated image began to ripple, like a photograph submerged in water. The father-in-law approached, slower this time, his demeanor shifting. He extended his hand, this time not out of courtesy, but out of respect. "I should have known. Why was this a secret?" "It wasn't," I answered calmly. "They just didn't want to know." He nodded slowly. "Not anymore." Behind us, a bridesmaid, flustered and rushing, tripped on her hem and sent a champagne flute crashing near Bryn's feet. The glass shattered, one shard catching her wrist just enough to draw a thin line of red. She recoiled, too quickly, more from being seen than being hurt. The attention she once craved now clung to her like static. I watched her flinch, not at the pain, but at the exposure. That familiar panic of being watched, not adored. I turned without a word. As I walked away, I whispered to no one in particular. And that's the first drop. As I stepped back into the ballroom, the hush that had fallen minutes earlier still lingered like perfume that overstayed its welcome. The buzz was returning, but not the same. Something had shifted. People no longer glanced past me. Now, they looked at me, directly, some with widened eyes, others with thinly veiled curiosity. One woman, a brunette from Marcus's side I'd never met, leaned toward her friend and murmured, "She's a judge. Why didn't Bryn mention that?" Why indeed? From across the room, Marcus stood at the bar, holding a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking. His gaze didn't drift. It was fixed on me. Not the casual glance of a polite fiancé, but something deeper, calculating, curious, maybe even betrayed. As the waitstaff refreshed flutes and replaced empty plates, he set his glass down and made his way to Bryn, who was directing the photographer near the floral arch. I watched them speak, quiet, tense. His hand on her arm was subtle, but his jaw moved tightly. I couldn't hear his words, but I read the body language as if it were a deposition. He was asking questions she didn't want to answer. Bryn tilted her head, offering that high-pitched laugh she saved for deflection. I knew that tone. "She's very private, doesn't like to talk about work," I imagined her saying, but this time it didn't land. He stepped back. His brows drew closer together. That was the first real crack in her empire. She knew it too. I could see it in the way she immediately started working the room harder, louder. She leaned into groups with exaggerated gestures, hugged old family friends too long, retold jokes that had already expired. Desperation coated every syllable, then she whispered something to our mother. Mom turned toward me, then hesitated. Her eyes didn't carry the confidence they once had when Bryn called the shots. It was doubt now, thin, but present. She turned back to Bryn and said something that made my sister stiffen. I remained at my table, sipping ginger ale, watching. Like a juror who already knew the verdict, but was curious how the defense would try to twist it. It didn't take long. A guest, young, a bit drunk, and far too entertained, wandered over, phone in hand. "You should see this," she said, smirking. She flipped the screen to show Bryn's Instagram story, just posted moments ago. A photo of the ballroom stage, blurry and angled, but captioned with, "Some people only show up to steal the mic." Vague enough for plausible deniability, sharp enough to slice. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I opened my private feed, untouched for months, and typed one sentence. "Truth doesn't need the mic. It brings its own echo." Posted. Within minutes, a notification popped up. A like. Then another. Someone at the party, not a friend, not family, had publicly acknowledged me. And that was the spark. I glanced up to find Marcus walking toward me. alone. He didn't smile. He handed me a fresh glass of ginger ale. Why do I get the sense there's a lot I wasn't told? I sipped. Because you were only meant to see one version of this family. He nodded, slowly. I think I've seen enough to know that version was edited. He didn't walk away. Before I could say more, a woman in a headset tapped my shoulder. A quiet, almost embarrassed tone followed. Sorry, Ms. Gaines. The media team's prepping the recap article. They asked for your photo. Should I approve it for release? I looked past her toward Bryn, who stood with her back to me, clearly trying to avoid looking my way. I smiled gently. Yes, it's time they knew who actually showed up. I stood near the photo backdrop, adjusting my dress where it had bunched slightly at the hip. It was a moment of pause, one I'd earned. The camera flashes had moved on to another cluster of guests, and I was enjoying the stillness when a staff member in black approached me. Hey, he said, juggling a light fixture in one hand. Do you know where I can plug this rig in? I think one of the outlets on this wall is dead. He didn't wait for an answer, just gestured toward a power strip near my feet. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to see if he'd realize. He didn't. I'm not crew, I said finally, gently but firmly. He blinked, embarrassed. Sorry, you looked like you knew where things were. I handed him the rig. You might want to ask someone wearing the earpiece. He mumbled an apology and walked away. I didn't watch him go. Before I could breathe, another guest stepped forward, an older woman holding an empty champagne flute. Could you take this? She said, offering it without even making eye contact. I took the glass, walked it to a nearby tray, set it down. Then I left that corner of the room for good. Invisibility isn't the same as humility, and I'm no longer either. Back near the bar, I could feel the temperature shifting, not physically, but socially. Guests were now asking me questions, stopping mid-conversation to say things like, I had no idea, or, you must have worked on some interesting cases. They didn't all know what I did, but they knew enough now not to treat me like I was disposable. Bryn noticed. She saw the conversations, saw Marcus watching me more than her, saw the nods, the shared glances, the phone someone passed around with my name on it. Cornered and rattled, she pulled our mother aside, whispering fiercely behind a floral arrangement. I watched as Mom looked toward me, then back at Bryn, her face a portrait of worry, not loyalty. A few minutes later, the MC took the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we'd like to invite someone very special to say a few words. A woman of achievement, strength, and family. Please welcome Bryn's sister, Anitra. The room clapped, half in confusion, half in relief at the change in tone. I looked to Bryn. She wore that brittle smile I'd seen too many times, a trap disguised as grace. I walked toward the stage, steady. My heart didn't race, my heels didn't falter. I took the mic. Then I looked out across the room, the same room that had spent the evening pretending I was optional. I decline, I said. It was quiet. Let the record show I was here, I continued. That's enough. I set the mic back on the stand and walked off. The silence that followed. It was louder than the band had been all night. A man near the front turned to his wife and whispered, "That was the most graceful power move I've seen in my life." Another murmured, "She said more in 5 words than Bryn said in 5 years." Bryn didn't move. She couldn't. Back at my table, I picked up my ginger ale and took a sip. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. 2 words. We talk. I looked up. He stood across the room, drink in hand, eyes only on me, finally seeing. The patio doors shut behind me with a soft click, muffling the DJ's voice as he launched into another overplayed pop medley. Marcus stood near the railing, one hand in his pocket, the other loosely holding a glass of untouched whiskey. The tension in his shoulders was unmistakable, not stiff with anger, but dense with questions. He didn't greet me right away. He just looked at me for a long moment, like trying to reassemble a puzzle with new pieces he didn't know had been missing. "I had a conversation earlier," he said finally, quiet, "with a guy I went to law school with, Tim Watkins, works corporate defense now." I nodded once, waiting. He said something odd. Told me, You're marrying into the Gaines family? Funny, her sister's the judge who buried us in the Kavanaugh case. Ruthless, but clean. Marcus turned to face me more fully. Is that true? I held his gaze. It's not the first time someone's described me that way. He laughed once. Short, sharp. It wasn't the insult he thought it was. Silence hung between us. Beyond the glass, the celebration continued. Plates clinked, laughter swelled, but we stood apart, in a truth neither of us could unhear. He exhaled. I realized, you're not invisible, Anitra. You were erased. I gave a slow nod. That's how curated families work. They decide which version of you fits the picture. Then crop accordingly. He looked down at his drink, then poured it out into a nearby planter. As if on cue, a little girl in a tulle dress and frosting-streaked cheeks ran up to me, holding a cupcake. She beamed. Are you the babysitter? Marcus choked slightly on a laugh, then caught himself, horrified. But I knelt to the girl's level and smiled gently. No, honey, but I watch everything. She giggled and ran back inside, leaving a trail of pink frosting on the stone floor. I stood, brushing off my hands. Even when you don't fit the frame, people still think you're part of the furniture. Marcus didn't argue. He just looked at me like he was seeing something he'd ignored for too long. You want to walk back in with me? He asked. It wasn't performative. It wasn't protective. It was acknowledgement. So I did. We stepped through the doors together, not hand in hand, not dramatic, but visible, present, heads turned. A cousin stopped mid-sentence. An uncle blinked twice. Bryn, standing near the dessert bar with a fresh flute of champagne, went pale. Her expression fractured for the first time all night. She moved fast, cutting through the crowd like a storm front. What are you doing? She hissed, eyes darting between Marcus and me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. Looking at what you refused to see. Their father appeared then, his face redder than usual, voice low and sharp. Control the narrative, he said to Bryn, pulling her aside. Now. But there was no narrative left to steer. Before I could disappear into the crowd again, a woman in slacks and a blazer, media badge on her lapel, stepped beside me. Judge Gaines, she said discreetly. One last question. I tilted my head, curious. The Westfield indictment, she said. Did you authorize it before tonight? I paused, turned slowly to meet her eyes. Yes, I said, calm and clear. And there's more coming. I stepped back into the ballroom with the quiet calm of someone who no longer needed to justify her place. The doors hadn't changed, the lighting hadn't shifted, but the eyes had. They followed me now, curious, cautious, and finally, aware. No one tried to block my path this time. No one offered me a drink I didn't want or asked if I was staff. They simply moved. It was the first time all night the air parted without resistance. I didn't search for Bryn, but I found her easily. She was still at the dessert station, flanked by 3 women I recognized from her Pilates studio stories. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her grip on her flute was tight, her jaw set too still. She felt it. I passed a table where a tech-savvy guest, early 30s, sharp haircut, too many apps on his phone, was chatting with another guest about the logistics of the night. This whole site setup, the RSVP system, the real-time seating chart, the slideshow design, honestly impressive, he said. So clean, so user-friendly. I assumed Bryn outsourced it. Someone responded, louder than they realized. Didn't Bryn design the whole system herself? Before anyone could add more, a staff member passed by and offered, casually but clearly, no, actually, the back end was designed by a legal consultant, Anitra Gaines. Think she does systems stuff on the side. The name hit like a dropped fork. A hush swept through the circle. Bryn's laugh, stiff and slow, came too late. Oh, that was just a little favor she helped with. It wasn't a big deal. She never wanted credit. I stepped closer, just enough. Most of what I do, I said calmly, is behind the scenes. Until it isn't. The silence returned, but this time it was respectful. One young guest, maybe a college junior, turned to me and said, "That's powerful." I gave her a quiet smile. One woman nodded slowly. Another raised her glass. Something was building. Something Bryn couldn't filter, crop, or caption. Later, a photographer moved through the room, capturing candid shots. As I turned mid-conversation, my sleeve shifted up my arm. It was unintentional, but the result wasn't. A glint of silver, a watch, not just any watch, an award from the Federal Judicial Center, engraved with my full name and appointment circuit, given only to federal judges with nationally recognized records of integrity. Someone caught the detail. Within minutes, the whispers multiplied. She's not just a judge. She's that judge. Did you see the watch? That's not something you order online. I heard it all without acknowledging a word. Bryn tried to recover. She hates attention, she said to no one in particular. She never wanted spotlight. But the spotlight was already there, and for once it didn't look at her. Marcus made his way over to her, his expression unreadable. You tried to bury a star, he said, low but firm. Now the whole room sees it. She laughed, brittle and sharp, but her hand trembled. Her champagne flute slipped slightly, caught just in time, but enough to reveal the crack in her performance. And then the room went dim. The video montage began, a curated reel of Bryn's life, childhood clips, posed engagement photos, clips of her PR awards, her wellness brand launch, testimonials, a few laughs, a few misty-eyed nods. Then, silence. The screen went dark. Someone asked, confused, wasn't there a section about Anitra's work? Another voice chimed in. I thought Bryn mentioned it would be included. The screen blinked, glitched, and then faded to black. The montage was over. No mention, no photo, no tribute. They edited me out again, I whispered. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a folded paper, and looked down at the timestamp. But this time, I added, I kept the receipts. The garden outside was quiet, more honest than the ballroom had ever been. I stepped into the soft light pooling beneath the string lanterns, finally able to exhale without calculating what came next. My heels crunched lightly on the gravel path as I made my way toward the far bench, tucked behind a hedge of white roses. From my clutch, I pulled out a small envelope, worn at the corners, the seal broken years ago, but never discarded. I'd kept it in every briefcase, every drawer, every place where I'd need to remember who I really was when people tried to rewrite me. The handwriting on the front still made my throat tighten. Valora Gaines. My grandmother. The only person who ever said my name like it mattered before the world did. I unfolded the letter slowly. Anitra, it began, in that cursive that curled at every T and looped gently at every Y. You've always been more than what this family can name. When others are louder, it doesn't mean they're deeper. When the lights are brightest, you won't need to be introduced. They'll already know. I had memorized those lines long ago, but they struck different now, after a night like this. The applause for Bryn had faded. The speeches, the stories, the curated legacy, all flickering under the weight of something uncurated. Truth. I folded the letter back, careful not to crease it further, and tucked it into the lining of my clutch. A tear threatened the corner of my eye, but I blinked it away. This wasn't grief. This was release. I had spent too long trying to be seen in a room built to overlook me. But the real victory wasn't being applauded. It was stepping out of the frame and watching them scramble to explain my absence. Recognition isn't given, I whispered to myself. It's reclaimed. Behind me, the door clicked. I didn't need to look to know it was Marcus. He sat down beside me, saying nothing at first. The silence between us was oddly comfortable. I didn't know what I was walking into, he said after a while. Tonight changed that. I didn't answer. You're not who I expected, he added. You're better. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the printed ceremony program. Folded at the corner, a note scribbled in pen read, Anitra Gaines, U.S. District Judge, right next to Bryn's paragraph. Someone noticed, he said, handing it to me. I took it, smiled faintly. That's enough. Inside, the music swelled again, too loud, too eager, but I'd already disconnected from it. I stood, brushed down my dress, and nodded once to Marcus. He didn't ask me to stay. That mattered more than if he had. By the valet stand, a young staffer saw me and gave a small nod. "Your car's ready, Judge." No stammer, no questions. I slid into the back seat of the black sedan, the door closing with a soft finality. As we pulled away, I glanced back through the window one last time, not in longing, not even in bitterness. Just in finality. And then, the phone buzzed in my lap. A legal news alert. My name, the ruling from the Westfield case, had just gone public. I leaned my head back against the leather seat, letting the streetlights smear through the glass. I didn't win a moment. I walked into my truth. The sky outside my hotel room was still dark when I woke. Not the kind of restless waking that comes from anxiety, but the steady awareness of someone with a schedule, a purpose. I didn't need an alarm. My body had remembered. The room was hushed, the city not yet alive. I moved quietly, dressing in a black blazer and blouse, clean lines, simple gold studs. I pinned my hair back, no makeup beyond the essentials. Today wasn't about image, it was about facts. On the desk near the window sat a single document, 8 pages stapled in the top left corner. Federal authorization, investigative findings, recommendations, signed by me. The final signature, dated 2 weeks earlier. I reread it once, not because I doubted it, but because I liked knowing I hadn't hesitated. I hadn't written it in anger or spite. I wrote it in precision. Bryn's nonprofit, her darling branding machine, the one built on buzzwords and fake impact metrics, had violated more than ethics. Misappropriated grant funds, manipulated financials, shell partnerships. I stood, slipped the folded press release into a plain white envelope, and headed down to the hotel reception desk. The sun had just started to crest over the skyline. At the front desk, I handed the envelope to the woman behind the counter. "Please deliver this to the Tribune's events editor, room 1403. She took it, glanced at the name, then back at me, no recognition in her face, which was fine. I didn't watch it leave my hands. I didn't need to. By the time I reached the hotel's breakfast cafe, phones were already buzzing. At the corner table, 2 older guests scrolled through their screens. I heard the first whisper before I even reached for the coffee pot. "Nonprofit scandal. Whoa, says she's a judge. Related to the bride?" Another voice, quieter. "Guess some families are built on Photoshop." Bryn's name was trending. So was mine. I sat at the window, poured my own cup, took it black. And I didn't check my phone. I didn't need confirmation. The work had already spoken. A bridesmaid darted past the cafe window, face pale, phone pressed to her ear. Marcus followed, but slower. He wasn't frantic, just still. He found me by the window minutes later. "You knew," he said. Not an accusation, a realization. I met his eyes. "No, I planned it." He didn't sit. Was this revenge? I took a sip of my coffee. It was justice. "You'll need to learn the difference." He opened his mouth to say something else, but I stood first. "Don't worry. I won't ruin your wedding. I just won't be part of the fiction anymore." This time, I turned first. Back in the lobby, the cameras had arrived. A local reporter, 2 national outlets. They hadn't come for Bryn's florals or her ring. They'd come for the verdict. And the woman who signed it. My mother appeared near the revolving door, lips tight, voice trembling. "You didn't have to destroy her." I stopped. Not out of guilt, but because I knew this moment would matter. "I didn't destroy her," I said quietly. "I just stopped covering for her." She didn't respond. I didn't wait. The hotel doors opened to a flash of lights. Someone called my name. Not Anitra, not the judge, just my actual name, like they finally knew it meant something. I didn't pause. I stepped into the waiting car, closed the door with finality. The silence in the car was a gift. I leaned back against the leather and exhaled. Then my phone lit up. U.S. Attorney's Office. I smiled. They always wanted me small, quiet, just grateful to be in the room. But some rooms were never built for the truth, so I built my own. The system didn't break me. I became it.